to step back into awareness of what was happening in my mind was horrible.
But that creator also needed to be created. And whatever created that needed to be created. And on and on and on. Change is best done lightly.
Yeah. Once we realize that we're not the thoughts, there's a sovereignty that emerges.
All right. Welcome, friends. Today, I am very happy to be joined by Nataraj, who is my friend and community member, also living here at Satchidananda Yogaville ashram. Previously, he's also lived at Sivananda ashram in the Bahamas. And just a little bit about him, Nataraj was a former run-of-the-mill business executive who traded the world for an ashram life. I'd love to ask him a little bit about that, as well as many other things. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this episode with us, Nataraj.
Hi, Avi. Great to be with you. Thanks.
So I guess I'll start with that. Why? Why have you made this choice to now live in an ashram community?
Oh, well, I think the short version is it suits me. It's this is the way I prefer to be now, and as is mentioned in the bio, I had a pretty good life. I had many conveniences and a lot of indulgences, and somehow just with all that I had, a loving family, everything, but still somehow wasn't happy. Not to say that I wasn't happy. I don't know how to say, but there was something missing. And I didn't know what it was. Now on the other side, knowing a more sort of abiding happiness, I can sort of see what was missing. And so now, anyway, some 6 years after some initial shifts, this is just how I prefer to be. I don't mind when I go back into the world and to be with friends and family and whatnot. But this is a nice way to live. It's very simple, very peaceful.
Would you say that you have different priorities now?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Much more simplified. I don't know how to say. I guess I was living that life that most people live, and it was wonderful while it was wonderful, and it was difficult while it was difficult. And I don't know to say. I guess that once you see through the cause and effect of the attachment to things and the complications of living in that way, it just is. It's not even an austerity, Avi, right? I mean, it's I'm not striving for anything, striving to do what the yogis call tapas or anything like that. This is just this is just better for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said. Just it suits me more.
Yeah.
That's how I feel too.
Yeah.
It's like, what are the components that suit you more here? Like, what specifically are you receiving here from this life that you like?
Well, one of the greatest things, it's so simple, but is the food. I find it very difficult to eat well when I'm not at the ashram. Not to say it's not possible, but it's expensive and takes a lot of thought. But that's a great advantage of being in the ashram, is just being able to eat healthy food all of the time without having to spend much effort on it or money. Yeah.
What about the quality of people that are around? I mean, one of my favorite things is that, I can sit down with a person like you for lunch and we can have these connections and these conversations that I don't know, they're so sweet. Yeah. They're so filled with value. Is that your experience too? Is that something that's important, the way that you've been able to connect with other people around here?
Yeah. It's funny because what comes to mind is birds of a feather flock together. My grandmother used to say that. And when I was a golfer, I hung around golfers, And now that I'm a spiritual mendicant or a yogi, I hang around people with similar aspirations and interests. And I guess I could say that I find it more meaningful, but is it more meaningful? I don't know. And but I do enjoy that by and large, people don't generally come to an ashram unless they have a taste for something other, something different. And so that makes it a really nice place to interact with people in earnest and an intimacy that's a little bit, what I find to be a little bit more authentic. But it's not better. I wouldn't say it's better.
Yeah. Even mentioning it's not better, like moving away from this better and worse type of thing. Is that important to you? Have you noticed maybe an old habit tendency to rank, this is my preference. I like this more than I like that thing. And have you been able to move beyond that? And what is that like to move beyond better and worse?
Well, this is kind of fun because I really think the whole game is about awareness and self-awareness, even of the, and especially of the ego self, right? Which is when I'm able to bring the cause and effect, of my own experience, then I can see that the hangover in the waiting room of, my preferences or desires or my expectations of how I want things to go. And if I have those things and I'm able to see them, I can see around the corner and see that it's not a good way to be happy. So to me, the whole game is really shining the light on the sort of the tapestry of the identities, and once we do that, they kind of fall away naturally, because really what we're all looking for is like this fly that's absolutely tormenting me right now.
I was just going to start talking about this fly.
Right? They talk about the guru and everything, right? Around Yogaville, right? Everything is Guru Dev or the guru. And of course it's true in a very subtle way. And, but what will I let disturb my peace? Will I let my preferences disturb my peace? If food isn't cooked the right way, am I going to gripe about it at the lunch or the dinner table? No. Yeah.
Right. I was thinking about
it's too facile to give away the peace and the contentment, the happiness. It's over such trivialities as preferences. Yeah.
It seems so tricky, right? It's like automatically, I thought, okay, we have a preference here where this fly wasn't around.
Right.
But this fly is around right now. And how to just settle into that. Right. And also how to make a decision about, like, do I do something to try to fix the problem and change it? Or do I just accept the situation as it is and deal with it?
Well, that fly landed on the tip of my nose several times. What kind of comedy show were we running here? Yeah. Yeah. And it's, what's interesting too, is that in the real sort of looking through this, the construct of how we identify as individuals, how I identify as an individual and how I engage with and interact with the outside world. What's the play between inside and outside? And, preferences are they're like a subtle on-ramp into opinions, which then grow into beliefs and then grow into belief systems, right? And now we're completely bound, And so as we exit the gross, as I exited the gross of the known and the unknown belief systems, right? The ones that I was aware of and attached to, and the ones that I was unaware of that were just part of my, I guess I call it my subconscious identity structure. And then I began to notice opinions and how really absurd it was. And then after the absurdity of opinions became clear to me, then I start to look at preferences. And then when you see the absurdity of preference, then it gets even subtler into thought patterns, right? And then into the thought itself. And the crazy thing is that really this sort of reverse journey back to the subtle, the sort of atoms of our reality, which is thought, the atomic structure of our perceived reality being thought. It's I don't know what to say. It's both at first disturbing and then incredibly liberating. Just funny, really. But when we sort of push through the miasma of our beliefs, opinions, preferences, thought patterns, the vasanas and vrittis that the yogis refer to in the sutras, then what remains when all of that is peeled away? It's a fascinating journey.
I find like this well to be so deep, though. Like I don't know.
Bottomless.
It's totally bottomless. It's like, it seems that having opinions or preferences is so entrenched in the way that I operate, right? Like even going back to food, right? Like at the start, right? I have a preference to have the food here, right? Versus outside of here. I prefer to live in an ashram. So it's like, how do we, like, is it even a reasonable goal to not have preferences or desires, or to make this, like, I feel like I need to be making decisions and they have to be based off something. So they have to be based off of my opinion of what I think would be better for me. Right.
Yeah. No, it's funny too, because it's so subtle. Right. But like, and I thought this for a while, like, the preference is the problem. No. The preference is not the problem at all. The opinion is not the problem. Even the belief is really not the problem. It's the relationship that the I has to the preference, opinion, or belief. It's the sense of separateness, the sense of individuality, it's the sense of distinctiveness, the sense of pride or reverse pride, that it's my attachment to it that's the problem. I think it informs who I am. It doesn't actually, I still have preferences, obviously. And have opinions too. I have opinions about opinions, clearly, because But it's just when we see through when we see through how sticky it is when we attach to it, then we can handle it much more lightly. A bit like holding water gently, and eventually it's going to slip through the fingers. But it's not a grip. It's not. It's no longer like that.
So that was my next question. Like, what is the antidote for taking my opinions, my preferences so seriously, getting really worked up about them? What's the antidote for that?
I think there are lots of them. There's many paths to this. My own particular experience and what I'll say is this lifetime is knowing, seeing what is an opinion. How did I arrive at it? And what's my relationship with it? What's my geometry, subject and object geometry with the I that has an opinion? What's fascinating to me is that what I found, and I've been doing this for 6 years, pretty much as my full-time career is contemplation, which I suppose to a lot of people would be a waste of time, but I assure you it has not been. But the objects of awareness, let's just take opinions, for example. They help me uncover who I think I am, right? Who the aspect of, we call it ego, which is also not a problem, right? But if I can identify what my opinion is, then it helps me uncover, weed out who it is that I think I am that holds that opinion. And that now, it's that identity that holds that opinion. If I can release that or step behind it and see compassionately, the aspect of the ego that holds that opinion, to not judge it because, well, that's its own thing. But if I can step back and have a nurturing attitude towards the one that has opinions, and from there also recognize how it enmeshes me in this cycle of cause and effect. It's binding. But once you see the patterns of the binding nature of attachments and hold that in a self-forgiveness, a self-compassion, a self-love, then it can just vanish without much more effort. That the seeing in the light of awareness, the ignorance as to the play of this looping, this cycling of experience. Once it's seen, it loses its power over it. So the answer to the question to me is knowing, is seeing the patterns of identity, of experience, behavior, thought, emotion. Once I see that from a non-judgmental standpoint, then I can be free of it. Mm. And I think it's fun to sort of pick away at the tapestry of this what I call myself. It's some mixture of ego and whatever else.
So it's like it's seeing the mechanisms of the game. Is that what you're saying? Is that instead of like kind of getting stuck in the game, yeah. I'm seeing or trying to see how the game works, and by doing that, I'm not as stuck in my character, so to speak, because I see my character working, operating within the larger tapestry of it all.
That's such a great way. It's I get the image of a chessboard and a chess game. I mean, how could you possibly play chess if you don't know the rules of the game? And yet we do. And I could say it this way gently. I mean, this is not to be judgmental, but it's fun to me. Like, for a while I had one option. I could move forward one square and I was a pawn. That was my only option. I didn't really know I was playing, and I was always the first one sacrificed, and I could call that attachment. And as we free ourselves, from this sort of the binding nature of the, I keep using the word attachment here, so I'll just stick with that. You begin to, the identity becomes a little bit more fluid. There's more latitude. We have more moves available to us, where the queen can navigate the board, more or less, and the king doesn't need to. So, yeah, I think it's important to know the rules of the game, and we think we do, but or I could say I thought I did, and I just didn't understand how all of this works.
Will we ever know how it all works?
Yes.
You think so? While we're alive?
I'm certain of it.
Hmm.
Yes. it's right here. it's the clues to it are in everything, every last thing. Yeah. The clues to that are in.
All right, then let me ask you a tough question that I've been contemplating. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a game that we're in, right? And something needed to create the game, right? The creator, God, divine force, whatever you want to call it. And what I had a thought that I never had before, but that everything needs a creator. So there's a creator of this game that we're playing here, but that creator also needed to be created. And whatever created that needed to be created. And on and on and on. Everything needs a creator, as far as I can see. What's that about? How can I understand that?
Right.
When does it end? How can I possibly understand that?
Well, that's what the sages will say is the fundamental limitation of the mind, is that it's reflective. And so that question asked by a me that is using the mind, a reflective tool to inquire, it's a hall of mirrors. There's no end to the reflectivity of that. And so really, our only hope to know that is to be free of thought. and that's kind of really, it's the imperative for gradually, developing, I guess we could say, mindfulness and some semblance of peace. And eventually, we can actually be free of thought and be that awareness that I guess in a way you could say precedes thought. And in there's knowing without learning, and the sages talk about it. It's nothing new, but yeah, from the sense of, to come back to this reflective, from the sense of me, from even the sense of I or I am, it is reflective. And there's always something that can pretend to leap behind it to be the creator of the created. It's super fun to me, this geometry of subject-object relationship, right? And the yogis and the sages, talk about the subject and object and how, and this relationship. And there's no end to subjectifying oneself or objectifying others. And in so doing, really objectifying oneself. I wonder if it, but anyway, so that's the game, is the real power comes when we have mastery over thought and mind, rather than being enslaved to it.
And will that mastery come as we foster this relationship with silence, with no thinking, right? Like searching for this balance of, like, kind of what you're saying, like it's not only fun, but fruitful to think about the mechanisms of the game and to try to understand it, right? And using my mind, my thoughts to do that. But then also just letting go of that and having that's what I come to understand, even through the mind of understanding how the game works. I see that to even keep searching and understanding it, maybe I'm not playing the game as well as if I just let it all go.
Yeah. That's my experience, Avi, is different than a lot of the teachings that I've, been exposed to and rejected, frankly. I don't I don't think that, in my experience, I have not found it fruitful to try and control the mind. I found it fruitful to recognize that these thoughts are not mine, that they don't originate from me, they don't emanate from me. I could say, from a perspective of experience or perceptually, they flow through what I call me or my mind. But and of course, it's worth saying that I'm absolutely responsible for them as well. I'm the host. It's my house, and I'm responsible for everything that happens in this house, or this temple, you could say. And so, to attach to these thoughts and to bring them into action. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is not shirking responsibility or accountability. It's the opposite. It's once we realize that we're not the thoughts, there's a sovereignty that emerges that we don't know is missing until it's returned. This sovereignty, this dignity of being that somehow seems to, we have the experience or the perception that it returns. And and then what to do with it? That's nothing really. It's just happiness, right? It's just peace of mind. Yeah, but I found it when I first started meditating, for example. I joked that it should be outlawed by the Geneva Convention, meditation, because it was so painful for me. To step back into awareness of what was happening in my mind was horrible, extremely disturbing. And I could only do it for 30 seconds at a time, and would have to retreat into some distraction. And it's disturbing. I mean, I found different levels of awareness or consciousness can be very disturbing at first. And then somehow they release into something, really sublime. But this idea, I remember somebody saying, in meditation, you put the frog on a plate, right? And if the frog, starts to hop away, you bring and you put it back. For me, I tied a string to its leg, and I watched where it went, and I took notes, right? Or more specifically, the metaphor that I used for myself was I watched thought. I watched what was happening with these thoughts and the sort of begetting that happens with thought, and how quickly narratives develop to prove my original bias anyway, which is to protect and defend the ego's I'm right, And so I just watched, what is the nature of thought? How does it behave? And I would let it go. I went deep sea fishing a couple times. I could never do that now, but anyway, it was fun then. And and you have to let the mind take the line. Otherwise it'll snap, And then at some point you begin to, pull back on. And I had this image of the mind being another aspect of me. And it would go off proving its original bias of something about, how so-and-so is a jerk, or how I'm right and they're wrong, whatever it was. And it almost travels a reverse path, to prove that point. And so I would ask it at some point, turn around. I would hand it a microphone, in sort of visual imagery. Prove that it's true. And so I would play this game with my own thoughts, right? Sounds crazy, I suppose, but it was wonderful. And eventually, I'd hand the microphone to the one who identified with the thought or the opinion. And he would just say, game's up, gig's up. I can't prove it, And what's also super fun about that one, Avi, is that what was revealed in that dynamic was that if it's not love, it's not true. What a hugely liberating thing that was, and enabled me to clear out all manner of things in myself that that weren't true. That were all about judgment of myself primarily, that were then projected on other people. So this notion of trying to control the mind, yes, I think it's possible. And I would say in my own way, I've probably done some of that as well. But really knowing the patterns, recognizing the patterns, pattern recognition. It's the whole game of exposing the sort of the false that obscures the truth. Yeah.
So I want to ask, what allowed you to get to that place from being stuck in the thoughts to now kind of liberating yourself, being very interested. So you had these habits of thinking and judging, and the way you described it is beautiful. There was some other energy that was more powerful than that habit for you, which motivated you to investigate how everything was working and therefore move beyond it into a new place. Like an allegiance. You had allegiance to something else. Was it allegiance to truth? Was higher than your old ways of being? Is that what it was? Or was it something else?
It's such a great question, this. And along the way, there's so many different answers. I mean, one is, briefly, I had no choice in any of this. Yeah, we can come back to that, but that I had no choice. There was no choice. And the recognition of that, I mean, it sort of is the on-ramp to the contemplation of free will. But I recognized that as the one who was attached, who was caught up in it and unconscious of being caught up in it, that one had no free will. I had this realization one day that I was a marionette doll, and I did not know who was pulling the strings. I called my therapist and I said, what had happened? All right. So what had happened was, I called a meeting of the management team where I was working, and I had some difficult news about the company's financials and to deliver. And I did a 15-minute meditation before I went in. And my intention going into the meeting was to allow people to ask questions and to arrive at their own conclusions, so I didn't have to force feed them and make people uncomfortable. Right? Well, at some point, this is some 7 years ago, maybe it was 8 years ago. At some point, one of the vice presidents turned to me and she said she didn't understand. And I think somehow I felt that threatening, and so I just turned on it, verbally, just, eviscerated, humiliated. And as it was happening, Avi, I remember somehow it went slow motion, like a car accident, literally. For me, that was the experience. I could see the words coming out of my mouth, and there was another me behind all of that saying, no, don't say it. Right. And I saw the whole thing happening. I was like, this is 3 months repairing this relationship now, just because. And I was clearly, it was happening and I had no control over it. I called my therapist afterwards and I said, something is pulling my strings and I don't know what it is. And this is untenable. Make it stop. That was kind of the language that I used to use back then. This is untenable. And so she said, come in. And it was one of those moments of awareness of the being at the mercy of mind and not understanding what mind was, and the deeply woven threads of shame and vulnerability, uncomfortable with vulnerability, all in this tapestry that I thought was me, that I needed to defend or promote, And it was one of those poignant experiences that, and once we see those kinds of things, then really, is it a choice? Can you unring that bell? Can you unsee what's been seen? And so while I felt like there was no choice, the choice that I had at that moment was to be honest with it, to face it. And this is what I call suffering honestly. Like, I let it all. I did a deep dive on myself and did a lot of there was a phase, I used to call it sitting with my hand between my knees and tears and snot between my feet. That was what that phase of life was like. It was a great purgation, or a releasing of these old definitions of self. It reminded me of, I think somewhere in the Bible, Jesus says, through the wound. It was through the wound that I sort of dove headlong into it. And I must say, like, I understand why we resist this, because I can say I barely survived it. I don't know how I did, but so grateful that I did. So, yeah. So I guess those two things, suffering honestly and realizing that I didn't have much of a choice. Once we see what we see, I suppose we can pretend to deny it, but we all know that doesn't work.
We all know what?
That doesn't work, to pretend that we didn't see it.
Mm. Do we all know that? I'm not sure if we all know that. I think there's a quite a popular tendency to deny and to live on the surface, and a real feeling that is a strategy for success, to essentially run away from truth.
Yeah, it's whistling in the dark. Of course, we don't know it. We don't know it, but we do know it because we see it in other people. We have a detached ability to witness the dynamics in other people and have a sense, not always 100% accurate, of course, but have a sense that they're in denial. If I can see it in another, this is a huge way to unbind oneself. If I can see a dynamic in another, I know it is true for me now, in this moment, right? If this is happening in my perceived reality, it's because it's for me. I mean, we've heard, people say simple things. If you're pointing a finger, there are three pointing back at you, like this. But it's in the process of creation. It's literally true. It's not just a quaint saying.
Back to the suffering.
Yeah.
Suffering, honestly.
Yeah, let's go back there.
It's like, why is it so difficult when we're in the midst of suffering to remember and to believe that there will be some good that comes from this, that this is happening for me some kind of way, right? Like when like I can know that intellectually, I can believe that, but when I'm actually suffering, it feels so challenging to believe that this is a good thing that's happening to me. It doesn't feel like a good thing at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's only in retrospect, right? Only in retrospect do I say, oh, without that sour dose, I wouldn't have learned what I learned or unburdened myself in a way that I was able to because of the suffering. It's Ram Dass referred to this as fierce grace, because we see in the rearview mirror, we see it as the greatest gift. It's a burning away of the faults. Suffering is not required. Pain, of course, we've heard this. Pain, of course, is just part of this experience, this Maya, the yogis call it, right? But suffering is not at all required, and yet absolutely seems to be a necessary part of the perceived experience in order to be free of the thing that causes suffering. And it's not the pain. Who can know that it's not the pain that causes suffering? Yeah. But to be in that moment, I mean, that's real. And even with all of this, I can say that, a few nights ago, I had a nerve pain that was intense, and I suffered that pain. But at least, luckily, I'm so grateful for this. I was aware that the one suffering that pain was not entirely real. The pain was real. The body was real. The mind was real. And it had been a way of saying, right? The suffering was unnecessary, but there it was. And so I didn't try and push it away. I went deep into it. I remember in this, if we have this inkling of an idea that maybe it's not I that's suffering this, if I can step behind it, what happens if I bring myself to for me, it was, can I find the place in the body where this pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, can I bring my entire awareness, like we do a body scan, but to bring a body scan into like a point like this, just like that. And can I bring my entire beingness into the center of that and die there? It's pretty intense. It's scary. But what I realized is that there's no, while the experience of dying is very real, the dying itself is not real. There's nothing at stake. There's nothing that's vulnerable. And of course, this is the trick, because as we're navigating through our own psychology, our own emotional history, our own personalities, our relationships, we have to hold with this nurturing, loving, compassionate kindness, the one who feels this is real for me. And it's lucky if we can hold, in the other hand, the recognition that I am really the awareness that all of this happens within, and somehow there's a it's a bit of a dance in the middle of those two things. So it's never rejecting my suffering or saying I shouldn't be suffering or I should be better than this. It's not that. It's surrendering into it, but also realizing that I'm held, I'm protected, I'm loved, and I'm the one that's protecting and loving and holding. I mean, it's a bit of a mind bender, really. And ultimately, in that fear, I feel compelled to say, in that fear, that when I brought myself into what felt like the extremity of dying into this intense fear, that there was always a refuge for me in the heart. There were two places of refuge. That if it became too great and I really risked some sort of a psychic rupture, I could come to the heart, and I could also float. I don't know if you can see on the screen, somewhere about up here. Can just sort of bring my awareness to there, and this ultimate protecting. It's like throwing a blanket over the entire thing, a warm sort of. So I feel like that's important to share, to not overdo this dying into the suffering, because, yeah.
So you believe that you are held and protected and loved? I would say it's my experience. And that it's, and this is kind of a fun thing too, is that, yes, I can assert from my experience that this is more true than the vulnerability and the fear.
To get a little taste of that is a huge gift, and to cultivate that is a wonderful way to be, to unbind oneself.
It seems like we want to hold on to this loneliness sometimes, right? And maybe that's like the falsehood. Like I'm alone, as opposed to I am a part of, and I am held and protected, and something loves me. There's, I think, there could be a resistance there to opening up to that truth, if it is true. I believe it is.
So you can get a sense of what I like to do. I love to contemplate these things and really, just like go into that space and explore them. And loneliness and connectedness it's a really powerful exploration of who we think we are. Ultimately, you could say that each one is completely alone, and that beyond the resistance of that, there is no loneliness in that. I mean, who could imagine that? And simultaneously, it is also equally true that, and actually from that and of that, we're totally connected. The separation, the experience of the separation seems to dissolve as the sense of the I-ness, the sense of I-ness becomes less and less localized to the body and to the personality. And there really is this sort of sense of expanding. And but this comes from, in my experience anyway, I'm sure it can come from a lot of different angles. There's so many different ways to do this, but for me, it came from really exploring, what is this aloneness? What is this loneliness? At the depth of my despair, sitting there, refusing to move, getting to the place from which there is no exit, and refusing to budge. What is the first thought? What's the first fear? I almost drove myself mad with this, so I caution. But I'm glad I did. And because the yogis call it asanga, the opposite of sangha, completely alone, the one, without a second. And yet from that place, it's all the one. There's nothing that's not, There's nothing that's not. I mean, how could there be, just geometrically speaking or mathematically speaking?
The last thing I'd like to ask you about is compassion.
Yeah.
Because we spoke somewhat recently. We were talking about different concepts, words, and you shared with me that compassion is one of the most important things for you. I've really been sitting with it, because at that time it was like, okay, I get compassion is important, to be compassionate. But since then, I want to let you know that I've really explored it and come to elevate it. And it's like what we're talking about, this being alone and together. All right, that I am totally regular, but I'm also unique. Or these dichotomies that almost like make no sense in life, like when you start to explore the game a little bit. And then to have compassion for how confusing it is, compassion for the situation that we're all in right now. So I want to be grateful. I do see this as a wonderful adventure of life. I totally do. But at the same time, there's reason to have compassion. And it feels very important now to me to remember compassion. So anything to share about that from you as a practice to be compassionate?
I mean, I think what one could say, it's a very high wisdom. Compassion, it works at so many different levels of experience and consciousness and awareness. Ultimately, when each one comes to recognize that the outside world of experience is a reflection of one's own self, one's own past. The yogis call it karma. The Bible calls it sin, but that's a whole different topic. It's been completely misunderstood with the introduction of shame. But once we come into awareness that all of our experience are waves bouncing off a distant shore, returning to us, then we can see that compassion, stillness, peace, softness is really the only antidote to suffering. That in the recognition that everything I experienced is a reflection of my own past, the soul or the jiva, right? That in a way, in that way, it's all me. And really, the first compassion is the self-compassion. So that I can soften and allow. I can allow what's happening to happen, and I can take a soft posture to not fight it, to not try and hurry it along, to not cling to it. And in that posture of compassion, the waves slowly lose their force because I'm not adding to it. The past loses its momentum. The surface of the water becomes calmer. And now, we enter a realm that's dreamlike, heaven-like.
Acceptance.
And whatever is, and it can't not be, because it's past. Playing is the now moment. It can't not be how it is. And my resistance to isness is insanity. I mean, it doesn't mean that I can't work to a better tomorrow, or in a way that understands how that works. But yeah, to be in resistance to this this now moment in space and time is crazy, because we don't, yeah. And compassion, and if we can't get that compassion, I think forgiveness is a wonderful way to get to compassion. And compassion, a wonderful way to get to love, agape, or unconditional, blissful love, abiding. And for me, I want to say the Ho'oponopono prayer was absolutely transformed my experience of myself and others. But that was the vehicle of forgiveness that I was lucky to stumble across. So yeah, I think compassion is really a very high wisdom. It's a recognition of how all of this works. That there is no judgment other than self-judgment. There's no love other than self-love. It's not possible. Laws of nature, not possible. Disturbing, I suppose, at first, but that alone will absolutely, for the one who can hold on to the tail of that tiger, they'll be free. Yeah. Love thy neighbor as thyself, because that's what it is. It's not an aspiration, it's a reality.
Just becoming aware of what is.
Being okay with it.
Yeah. That's liberation, right? That's freedom.
It's sanity.
Right.
Right. It's purely practical also. Yes, it's liberation, but it's purely pragmatic.
Right.
How absurd is it to be, in resistance to this moment, as we like to say in the spiritual world, this now moment. And yet that's how we do it. So. And there's not a problem, right? I mean, it's really one of the things that, to me, Avi, that as I look through, sift through my own experiences, is how often shame came around to try and transform the way I was understanding things. That through the that opacity of shame, or through the lens distortion of shame, it's not helpful. It actually is the double bind, the thing that to judge the judger, to suffer the sufferer. Shame is shame. It's tricky.
It's a weird thing that I think has happened. I consider it. It's like, how did that even come to be? That shame. So, I mean, there's a part of me that says that it's not natural, and then everything that is natural. So, okay. But for me, the real lesson there is the power of community. Because, I think we've been born, all of us, into this world where, it's all about the little I and the self. And that's where the shame can come from. This like obsession over the self of who I am. I have something that I need to prove, and I'm constantly just analyzing what I am, how good I am. And for me, I could say, I've become totally exhausted from doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I really pray and have a lot of trust, faith that we will move into a place where we get beyond ourselves in that kind of way. It just becomes like this old game that's not interesting anymore.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's it. And it's funny. I mean, the shame, I think, in the recognition that I am this, I did this. This is my past playing out, dressed up as this now moment. That it's all karma. If you use the concept of this, everything here is karma. Can't not be. The shame is still the lingering identity. That's the separate one that says, I shouldn't have done this. Right? Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, right? From this point of seeing, you can understand how, some of the early Christian monks would flagellate and wear camel hair and, really extreme tapas and all of that, to use a yogic term. The shame is not helpful. And it can be useful to know that from that limited identity, there's no free will. And that's both good news and bad news. And this is a debate, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but just for this, it's not really a debate. It's nuanced. That one doesn't have a lot of free will. There's a limited latitude. And so from who I thought I was, I didn't have a choice but to think and do what I thought and did. And now recognizing that, I can be easy with it. Like there's a forgiveness in that, a self-forgiveness in that. And unless I use that as an excuse to go out and do harm or be selfish in a worldly way, then I release myself from recreating new loops of suffering. So I think that the shame arises from the lingering, the dissolving, but the part that lingers, that remains, that's part of the separate identity, the psyche. That one feels a sense of guilt and unworthiness in the face of the God that's becoming more and more apparent. Hasn't yet completely merged with it, but is having a direct one-to-one experience of the beloved. And this beautiful process of being held in that and prostrating to that, and eventually, slowly, with grace, merging with it. But the shame is in the way, I think.
This makes me think that change is best done lightly.
Yeah. Yeah. That, Avi, I wish somebody had told me a lot earlier. Yeah. There was one of the first things that I heard from that inner voice was soften and allow. And it just seems to cover everything I encounter. And I, as yogis, I think of this as an energetic, psychological asana of soften and allow to it's a balance pose for sure.
Nataraj, thank you so much, brother.
Yeah, I love you, Avi.
I love
Thank
you too.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this content and think others might as well, please feel free to share and subscribe.